Blackwood Boys, Novella 2, Part 2 of 2, Act 15. The Farmer's Kennel. One evening, they camped in a farmer's field. The farmer, grateful to have buyers for feed and food, invited them to water their animals at his well. That night, they heard dogs barking. Not their dogs, but the farmer's. The barking turned to yelps of pain, then silence. "Something's wrong," Damien said, already moving. They found the farmer's kennel torn apart, dogs cowering in corners. Whatever had attacked was gone, but the damage was brutal. "Bear, maybe," Ego said, examining claw marks. "Big one." The farmer, when he arrived, was furious, but also afraid. "Third time this month. I can't afford to lose more dogs." That night, the boys returned to the kennels early before setting off for the road. Damien studied the surviving dogs, malnourished, poorly kept. While the others talked with the farmer, he quietly slipped into the kennel and emerged with a small bundle hidden in his shirt. "Damien," George said warningly, having seen him. "What did you do?" "He doesn't deserve them," Damien said fiercely. "Look how thin they are. This pup will die if it stays." George looked at the fierce protectiveness in Damien's eyes and said nothing more. Act 15. Teepa's betrayal. 5 days later, they camped near the small city of Crowning alongside a broad river. Beside them camped a circus troupe, preparing for a visit to Crowning's fairgrounds the next day. Tyne pulled the boys aside after dinner, his face grim. "My brother's been asking questions in town about runaways from Blackdown, about rewards." Ego's face hardened. "He knows?" "He suspects. For now, and Teepa, he likes gold more than he cares for company." Tyne looked genuinely regretful. "You've been good workers, and I wish I could keep you on, but I can't go against family. You understand?" "We understand," Ego said coldly. "How long do we have?" "He plans to send word to the road wardens tomorrow morning. You'd best be gone by dawn." That night, they slipped away from the caravan, taking only what they could carry. Damien insisted on bringing the stolen pup along with their own dogs. "The river," Ego decided. "We follow it east, away from the road, harder to track." "Harder to travel too," Ewan pointed out. "Better than chains," George said quietly, and that quickly ended the discussion. After the camp fell silent, Ego rounded up the boys, leaving Dan at his silent watch. Ego did not need him. Dan wasn't really family, he just wasn't a Blackwood. Act 16. River Survival. The river became their guide and provider. They fished, foraged, and slowly made their way eastward. The skills they'd learned as children in Blackdown's forests served them well. But they weren't alone in the wilderness. The first sign was fish disappearing from their cooking fires. Then they glimpsed it. A brown bear, massive and curious, drawn by the smell of their catches. "Don't run," Ego instructed as the bear circled their camp one evening. "Everyone stand tall and make as much noise as you can." After a few moments, standing tall and shouting at the top of their lungs, the boys picked up their belongings and ran. They found a tight thicket of trees to use as a barricade and wait out the bear's curiosity. The great bitch had other ideas. She charged out, all bristling fur and fangs, driving the bear back. It retreated, but they could feel it watching from the darkness. "It'll be back," Damien whispered. "It likes our fish too much to go far." Act 17. The garden discovery days later, exhausted and running low on supplies, they spotted cultivated land across the river. A garden and orchard, clearly tended but seemingly abandoned. "I'll swim across," Ego decided. "Check if it's safe." "I'll find another way," George said, already eyeing a fallen sapling that might serve as a pole vault. While Damien and Ewan waited with the dogs, Ego and George explored. The garden was full of vegetables ready for harvest, apples hanging heavy on the trees. But it was the cabin that made them freeze. The front door was torn completely off, hanging by splinters. Inside was carnage, furniture smashed, dark stains on the walls and floor. Ego found part of a human arm beneath overturned furniture. "We should go," he said, stomach churning, heading for the door. George froze in place, mentally tracking the horror that must have taken place. Without a word, he began to pile the broken bits of furniture, took out his fire-starting kit, and sparked a cleansing blaze in the middle of the floor. Ewan, just arriving at the cabin, saw the fire and kicked it apart, shouting at George for being so reckless. Ewan took an old broom from the wall and swept the smoking remains out the door. As he swept the floor clean, he found something, a pattern on the floor where the fire had been started. There, underneath the grime and detritus, wooden blocks were arranged deliberately. His curiosity overcoming caution, he began prying them up. Beneath was a steel chest and a large wooden crate. The chest was locked tight, but with George's help, the crate opened to reveal rich clothing, carefully wrapped. And beneath that, 50 metal balls, each the size of a fist, gleaming like silver. "What is this?" George breathed. "Trouble," Ego said, but he was already calculating. But maybe useful trouble. Act 18, The Hidden Children. By now Damien had found his way across the river, floating across on a log. While the others examined their find, Damien explored the area, discovering first an old outhouse, then a hidden and heavy door built into an embankment, a root cellar. The door was barred from the outside and covered with brush. "Someone's in there," Damien said urgently as Bitch sniffed about around the door's edges. Or was. The boys lifted the bar carefully. Inside, huddled in the darkness, were two children, a boy and girl, perhaps 10 or 11 years old. They were filthy, dehydrated, and unconscious. "Easy," Ewan said gently, reaching for the boy. "We're here to help." The boy's eyes fluttered open. He spoke, but in no language they recognized, liquid sounds that might have been pleas or warnings. They carried the children out into daylight. The boy accepted water gratefully, but when the girl woke later, she was furious. She shouted at them in that same strange language, pointing at the opened crate, gesturing wildly. "She's angry about the treasure," George guessed. "It's theirs, or they were guarding it." "Fat lot of good that did them," Ego said, looking at the destroyed cabin. "Whatever came here was looking for them, not the treasure." Act 19. Decisions in the dark. That evening, they made camp by the garden, the strange children watching them warily. They'd divided some of the silver balls among themselves, insurance against the future, and carefully reburied the rest. "We can't take them with us," George said adamantly, nodding at the children. "They'll slow us down. We can't leave them," Damien protested. They'll die." "They're not our responsibility," George argued. "We found them. They are our responsibility," Damien said softly. "We have to help them." The dogs were restless that night, growling at shadows. The bitch paced around the camp's perimeter, hackles raised. "Something's out there," Ego said, gripping his axe. They saw it then, eyes in the darkness. 6 eyes, glowing with a sickly red light. The stench hit them a moment later, a decay and wrongness that made them gag. The bear that emerged into their firelight at the river's edge was wrong. Its fur was patchy, its body misshapen. 6 eyes where there should be 2. It moved with unnatural grace, circling them. The bitch charged first, brave and foolish. The bear swatted her aside like a toy. The boys attacked desperately, Ego with his axe, George and Ewan with their new spears, and Damien his knife. It was Ego who landed the telling blow, burying his axe deep in the creature's shoulder. George followed, driving his spear into its head. Black, foul-smelling blood sprayed, and the bear collapsed with a sound that was almost a scream. "What was that thing?" Ewan gasped, helping the injured bitch. "Nothing natural," Damien said grimly. "Nothing that should exist." They left the carcass by the river, too exhausted to do more. But sleep came hard, and when it did, it was filled with 6-eyed shadows. Act 20. The Oracle's arrival. They woke to find an old man watching them from a river rock. He wore embroidered leather robes and held a spear with easy familiarity. His eyes were sharp as flint. "You killed it," he said without preamble. "But not properly," he added without disdain. "Who are you?" Ego demanded, reaching for his axe. "Yakov," the man replied with a broad, dramatic smile. "The great and wise oracle of the Western tribes. And you, young warriors, have stumbled into a story larger than you know." He gestured at the 2 children, who had crept closer to the fire during the night. "Prince Ian, Princess Illy, hidden here for safety, an effort that obviously failed." "Prince and princess of what?" Ego asked. "The Grass Sea tribes, prophesied to unite our people, to lead them to glory and a golden age of war." His expression darkened. "If they survive to maturity, that is." The bear you killed, it's one of 3 sent to find them. The smallest, I judge. The smallest, Ewan squeaked. And it's not dead, not truly. Unless burned in white fire for 3 days and nights, it will rise again, hungrier, angrier. Yakov stood, suddenly seeming much larger than his frame suggested. I'll take the children. You boys, you should run, far and fast. To Bannock, George asked. The oracle studied him for a long moment. Perhaps. Cities have their own protections, and Bannock is your kingdom's oldest city, built in an age long forgotten. But mark me, you've been touched. The darkness of destruction knows your scent. The old man sprung lightly down from the rock, stretching lightly, and seemed to set bearing, raising arm away from the river and past the cabin. I can take you to an old road, which will speed you to the coast, the old man said. That is where you are heading? He finished with a half-question. Not waiting for an answer, he summoned the boy and girl with a strange gesture and struck off in the direction he had pointed. Come along if you like, boys, he called over his shoulder. There is much I could teach you as we walk. They began the long trek through the forest, each of the boys lost in their own thoughts, none of them interested in listening to the old man, completely unaware that their greatest trials still lay ahead. Act 21. The weight of greed, Yakov led them on a path to an ancient, overgrown trade road, hurrying the 2 children on, as the boys had prepared to leave the ravaged homestead. Damien and the dogs striking out immediately with Ego following soon behind. George and Ewan stood transfixed by their discoveries from cabin and grounds. Look at these shields, Ewan breathed, hefting one of the ceremonial shields they'd found in the cabin. It was massive, decorated with intricate metalwork, and far too valuable to leave behind. And the spears, we could sell these for a fortune in Bannock. They're too heavy, Ego said flatly. We need to move fast. We'll manage, George insisted, already loading one shield with everything portable, the ornate clothing, several of the silver balls, preserved food from the cellar. Think what these are worth. Damien shook his head as he left. This is foolish. We can't keep up with them if you're dragging this. Then go ahead, Ewan said stubbornly. We'll catch up. Damien looked torn. Maybe we should stay together. We'll be right behind you, George promised. An hour at most. The road's just through those trees, right? Ego's jaw tightened. Fine. But if you're not at the road by nightfall, you will be sorry. We'll be there, Ewan assured him, already rigging straps to drag his shield like a sled. Act 22. The price of stubbornness. The first hour wasn't too bad. The shields, while heavy, slid reasonably well over the forest floor. But then the undergrowth thickened. Roots caught at the shield's edges, branches tangled in the straps. Ewan and George soon bickered, each choosing their own path ahead. Maybe I should leave some things, Ewan panted to himself, struggling to free his shield from a fallen log. Just a bit further, George insisted to his dog Cygnus, though sweat was pouring down his face. The road must be close. But as the shadows lengthened, they each had to admit they were lost. Worse, they were exhausted. I'll camp, George decided firmly, looking around the darkening forest. Start fresh in the morning. George managed a crude lean-to between 2 trees and set to sleep with Cygnus at his side. Ego's going to be furious, Ewan muttered to himself as he carried on alone and exhausted into the increasing darkness. Muley grew increasingly restless, whining and pacing. What's wrong, boy? Ewan asked, stroking the dog's head. Muley just whined louder, pressing against Ewan's leg. But Ewan was too tired to even make a shelter. He sat down against a large oak, Muley curled beside him, and within minutes was fast asleep. Act 23. The giant's arrival. Ewan woke to Muley's frantic barking and a smell that made his stomach heave. Decay and wrongness, far stronger than the night before. He opened his eyes and froze. Standing not 20 feet away was a bear. But if the one they'd killed had been wrong, this was an abomination. 3 times the size of a normal bear, its 6 eyes glowed like diseased stars. Its fur was patchy, revealing skin that writhed as if something moved beneath it. George, Ewan whispered, but he remembered that his friend was gone. The bear's massive head swung toward him. Muley, brave, stupid Muley, charged at it, barking furiously. No, Ewan screamed, scrambling to his feet. The bear swatted at Muley, who barely dodged, then fixed its six-eyed gaze on Ewan. Ewan ran. He crashed through the underbrush, the bear's footfalls shaking the ground behind him. A tree. He needed a tree. There, a tall pine with low branches. He jumped, caught the lowest branch, and pulled himself up. The bear slammed into the trunk, making the whole tree shudder. Ewan climbed higher, bark scraping his hands raw. The bear began to climb. No, 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 Ewan gasped, going higher still. The branches were getting thinner. Below, the bear's weight was bending the tree. Crack! The branch under Ewan's feet gave way. He fell, bouncing off branches, trying desperately to grab something, anything. The ground rushed up, but instead of solid earth, he hit something that gave way. Roots and rotted wood collapsed beneath him, and he tumbled into darkness. Act 24, Morning Rescue. Ewan! Ewan! The voice seemed to come from very far away. Ewan groaned, his whole body aching. Above him, through a tangle of roots and dirt, he could see daylight. Down here, he croaked. George's face appeared in the gap above. You're alive, I thought. When I saw the tree, the claw marks. Help me get out, Ewan said, then more urgently. Where's Muley? I haven't seen him. Come on, grab this. George lowered a branch down. It took several attempts, but finally Ewan crawled out of what turned out to be a pit left by a massive tree fall, hidden under roots and forest debris. You look terrible, George said, trying to joke, but his face was pale. I found these tracks. He gestured at massive paw prints, each twice the size of a dinner plate. It was huge, Ewan said shakily, 3 times bigger than the other one, and Muley. His voice broke. He tried to protect me, ran off leading it away. George gripped his shoulder. We'll find him, but first, we need to find the others. Act 25. The fort. The next morning, Damien was crying. Neither George nor Ewan had turned up. You wait here for them, Ego said. I will walk these 3 down to this fort and get to the bottom of this. And if they don't come, Damien whined, they will be here. They're tough. They're Blackwoods. Ego escorted Yakov and the 2 children to the fort the oracle had mentioned. But as they approached, it became clear something was very wrong. The fort's walls bristled with spears. Armed men, looking more like farmers than soldiers, walked the parapets. The gates were barred. Halt! A gruff old man in battered armor shouted. State your business. These children need sanctuary, Yakov called up. I am Yakov, oracle of the western tribes. Oracle or not, we're sealed to all travelers, the guard replied. Marshal's orders. War's coming. What war? Ego demanded. There have been attacks all across the county. The guard spat. No idea what it's about, but everyone came here to find shelter. Yakov's face darkened. The enemy's work. Turning neighbor against neighbor, causing chaos. Can't you explain? Ego asked. Tell them about the bears, the real threat? Men at war rarely listen to reason, Yakov said sadly. Come. We'll find another way. But there was no other way. Every gate was barred, every guard turned them away. Finally, frustrated and worried about his brothers, Ego made a decision. I'm going back. My brothers need me more than you. Yakov nodded slowly. Perhaps that's wise, but take care, young wolf. Chaos has marked you as an enemy. Act 26. The supply train. Ego was halfway back to where he'd left Damien when he heard them, 2 many horses to count, came pounding down the road towards him. He slipped off the road, hiding in the brush as a long train of horsed men charged past. They looked grim and determined. Behind them came supply wagons, groaning under the weight of weapons, food, and supplies. The drivers looked less military and more miserable. When the armed men had passed, Ego emerged. One of the drivers, an older man with a pronounced limp, slowed his wagon. You're heading the wrong way, boy, he said. Nothing back there but trouble. My brothers are back there, Ego said firmly. The driver sighed. More the fool you. We're conscripted, forced to supply this madness. The Hildu fort is about to be burnt to the ground. He shook his head. It'll be a bloodbath. Those locals don't have a clue what they are getting into. Then don't go, Ego suggested. Turn around. And be hanged for desertion? The driver laughed bitterly. No, boy, sometimes you're caught between the bear and the cliff. You just jump to avoid the bite and hope for water. As the supply train rumbled on, Ego ran back to where he'd left Damien, fear making his feet fly. Act 27. The search begins. Ego found Damien exactly where he'd left him, but the younger boy was pacing anxiously, the dogs circling restlessly. They didn't come, Damien said immediately. It's been hours and… He was cut off by George and Ewan stumbling out of the forest, both looking haggard. What happened? Ego demanded, then saw their faces. As Ewan poured out the story of the giant bear, Damien went very still. Muley's missing. Ewan nodded miserably. He ran off, leading it away from me. He saved my life. We have to find him, Ewan said firmly. Damien, that thing is out there. Ego started trying to cut off his brother before he got started. I don't care. Ewan's voice cracked. We don't leave anyone behind. Isn't that what you always say? George, who had been silent through this exchange, finally spoke. The boy's right, but we do this smart. The bitch can track him and we stay together. No more splitting up. Please, Ewan said quietly. He's all I have from home. Ego looked at each of them, then nodded. We find the dog, but at the first sign of that bear, we run. Agreed? Agreed, they chorused. Act 28. Into the Heights. The bitch picked up Muley's trail easily, her nose to the ground as she led them steadily upward. The forest thinned as they climbed, giving way to scrub and stone. He's heading for the mountains, George observed. Why? Trying to find somewhere to hide, Ewan suggested. By the second night, they were above the tree line. The cold was bitter, and they huddled together for warmth, taking turns keeping watch. The dogs were uneasy, constantly alert. On the third day, exhausted and footsore, they heard it, a faint whine echoing off the rocks. Muley! Ewan shouted, scrambling forward. They found him wedged deep in a crevice between two boulders, so far back they could barely see him. He was trembling, exhausted, but alive. Come on, boy, Ewan coaxed, reaching in as far as he could. It's safe now. But Muley wouldn't budge, whimpering and pressing himself deeper into the crack. He's too scared, Damien said. We need to… A low growl cut him off, not from Muley, from well behind them. They turned slowly. Yellow eyes gleamed in the afternoon sun. Wolves, a full pack, scattered amongst the rocks, cutting off their escape route. The big rocks, George said quietly. Climb. Now. Act 29. Battle on the stones. They scrambled up onto the boulder field, hauling the dogs up with them. The wolves followed, flowing between the rocks like grey death. They're not backing down, George said, gripping the long spear he held onto. They're hungry, Damien replied grimly. Desperate. Winter's coming and prey is scarce. The first wolf to leap at them met the bitch's jaws. She caught it mid-air, shaking it brutally, landing on it with a thunderous crunch. But more came. Ego's axe sang through the air, catching a wolf across the shoulder. George's spear fell among the wolves like a lightning strike, deadly. Even Damien fought viciously, his knife finding their marks. But it was Ewan, desperately protecting the terrified Muley, who fought hardest. When a wolf got past the others, he met it with nothing but a rock and fury, smashing it across the snout repeatedly until it retreated. There's just too many, Damien shouted, blood running from a gash on his arm. Then the bitch did something extraordinary. She planted herself at the narrowest point between the rocks and howled, a sound that seemed to come from the very earth itself. The other dogs joined her, even little Muley from his crevice. She then charged the leading wolf, taking it by the throat, ending the fight in a bloody, terrifying mess. The wolf pack paused, uncertain. In that moment of hesitation, Ego and George rushed them. The wolves circled, snarled, but finally one by one melted back into the rocks. We need to go, Ego said urgently. They'll be back. Working together, they finally pulled Muley from his hiding spot. Ewan clutched him close, tears streaming down his face. Never again, he whispered. I'm never letting you go again. Act 30. Lost in the dark. They descended as quickly as they could, but night caught them still on the mountain. They made camp in a cluster of pines, exhausted beyond measure. I'll gather more firewood, George offered, seeing their meager pile. We'll need it to keep the wolves away. He also wanted to find a safe tree to climb if things got desperate. Don't go far, Ego warned, but in the darkness, tired and disoriented, looking from tree to tree, George lost his bearings quickly. Every tree looked the same. Every direction seemed wrong. Idiot, he muttered to himself, finally admitting he was lost. Cygnus, his half-grown pup, whined at his heels. Too tired to continue searching, George found a large tree with sheltering roots and curled up beneath it. Cygnus pressed against him for warmth. Just for a moment, he told himself, just until the moon rises. He woke to Cygnus barking frantically and that horrible familiar stench. Act 31, the horn's call. George's hand found the horn at his belt, the one they'd taken from the cabin. Without thinking, he put it to his lips and blew with all his might. The sound echoed through the forest, clear and urgent. Then he ran. Behind him, something massive crashed through the underbrush. The bear. But whether the same one or another, he couldn't tell and didn't care. Trees whipped past. Branches tore at his clothes. Cygnus ran beside him, occasionally turning to bark defiance at their pursuer. A tree. He needed a climbable tree. There, an old oak with low branches. George jumped, caught, pulled himself up. The bear slammed into the trunk just as he got his legs clear. The whole tree shook. Cygnus danced below, barking and dodging as the bear swiped at her with massive paws. "Run!" George shouted at the pup. "Get away!" But Cygnus wouldn't leave, harrying the bear's heels like a tiny, furious hornet. Act 32. Brothers in battle. Back at camp, Ego's head snapped up at the horn's sound. "George," he said, already moving. "I'll stay with the dogs," Ewan said quickly, clutching Muley and looking at the wounded bitch. "I'm coming," Damien insisted, grabbing his butcher's knife. They crashed through the forest toward the sound, Ego leading with Dan close behind. The smell hit them first, that awful reek of wrongness. They burst into a small clearing to find George clinging to a tree branch while a massive bear tried to climb after him. Cygnus was doing his best to distract it, but he was tiring. "Hey you!" Ego roared, charging forward with his axe. The bear turned, fixing 4 of its 6 eyes on this new threat. The other 2 stayed locked on George. Ego's axe bit deep into the bear's flank. It roared, a sound that was part animal, part something else entirely. Damien came next with his dagger in hand, sinking it deep in the bear's shoulder. The bear swatted him away, and Damien flew through the air, hitting a tree hard. Ego attacked again from behind, his axe finding the gaps between the thing's ribs. But the bear seemed barely to notice. It reached for George again. That's when George dropped from the tree, landing on the bear's back. His spear found purchase deep in its back. The bear went mad. It spun, trying to dislodge him. George held on grimly, twisting the spear. Ego charged again. This time his axe found the bear's spine. There was a crack like breaking stone, and the creature collapsed. They stood panting, covered in black blood, staring at the twitching corpse. "Is it dead?" George asked weakly from where he lay, thrown from the animal's back. "Dead enough for now," Ego said. "But remember what the oracle said. We need to burn it." "With what?" George asked, sliding off the corpse. "We barely have enough wood for a campfire." "Then we cut it up," Ego said grimly. "Make sure it can't get back up, at least." Act 33. The fire circle. While they'd been gone, Ewan had faced his own crisis. The wolves had returned, drawn perhaps by the sound of the horn, the bitch's wounds, or the scent of fear. With only the injured bitch and the pups, Ewan had done the only thing he could think of. He'd spread their campfire out, creating a circle of smaller fires around them. "Stay close," he told the dogs, feeding the flames with every branch he could reach. The wolves prowled just beyond the firelight, eyes gleaming. One, braver than the rest, darted forward. Ewan thrust a burning branch at it, singeing its muzzle. It retreated with a yelp, but he was running out of wood. The fires were dying. That's when he made a desperate choice. The undergrowth was dry from recent rainless days. If he could control it, he began setting small fires in the brush, creating a wider barrier. Smoke filled the air, sparks flew up into the night sky. "Please don't let the whole forest burn down," he prayed, stomping out flames that spread too far. The wolves, faced with an ever-widening ring of fire, finally gave up. They melted back into the darkness, leaving Ewan coughing in the smoke, surrounded by smoldering earth. Act 34, Reunion and Revelation. When Ego and George returned, carrying an unconscious Damien between them, they found Ewan's camp transformed into a blackened circle of safety. "What did you do?" George asked, staring at the scorched earth. "What I had to," Ewan replied, his voice hoarse from smoke. Then, seeing Damien, "Is he alive?" Ego said, gently laying his brother down. "But hurt. That thing, it was enormous and strong." They worked through the night, tending wounds and trying to wash the stench of the dead bear from their skin and clothes. But no matter how hard they scrubbed in the nearby stream, the smell lingered. "It's in us now," Ego said quietly. "Like the oracle warned, we've been marked." As dawn broke, they sat around their rebuilt fire, exhausted beyond measure. Damien had not woken. None of them seemed to healed from the night's trials. The dogs pressed close, as if trying to protect them from further harm. "What do we do now?" Ewan asked, stroking Muley's matted fur. "We keep going," Ego said firmly. "To Bannock, to the city's safety. The Oracle seemed to think there might be protection there. If there is such a thing anymore," George added softly. They looked at each other, blooded, scarred, changed by their encounters with things that shouldn't exist. They were no longer the boys who had fled Blackdown full of dreams and hope, but they were alive, they were together, and sometimes that was enough. As they prepared to break camp, the dogs forming a protective circle around them, Ewan spoke softly. "Do you think it's dead? Really dead?" No one answered. In the growing light, they could see smoke rising in the distance, not from their fires, but from the direction of the fort. War had come to the hills, and they were caught in the middle of something much larger than a bounty on runaway boys. But that was a worry for tomorrow. For now they trudged on, surrounded by faithful dogs and the acrid smell of burned earth, while the world shifted and changed around them.